What is neo-behaviorism? Neo-behaviorism is a behavior cannot be fully understood simply in terms of observable stimuli and reactions. Neo-behaviorism introduced mediating variables into the behaviorist stimulus-response scheme. Neo-behaviorism is a school of thought that posits that the study of learning and a focus of rigorous, objective, observational methods form the key of scientific psychology. Neo-behaviorism is the second phase of behaviorism, which was closely associated with B.F. Skinner, Clark Hall, and Edward C. Tolman. Who is Edward C. Tolman? Edward C. Tolman, in full Edward Chase Tolman, born on April 14, 1886 in West Newton, Massachusetts in U.S., died in November 19, 1959 in Berkeley, California. Edward C. Tolman is an American psychologist who developed a system of psychology known as purposive or molar behaviorism, which attempts to explore the entire action of the total organism. Tolman, perhaps best known for his work with rats and mazes. Tolman's work challenged the behaviorist notion that all behavior and learning is a result of the basic stimulus-response pattern. What was his experiment? In a classic experiment, rats practiced a maze for several days. Then the familiar path they normally took was blocked. According to the behaviorist view, the rats had simply formed associations about which behaviors were reinforced and which were not. Instead, Tolman discovered that the rats had formed a mental map of the maze, allowing them to choose a novel path to lead them to the reward. His theory of latent learning suggests that the learning occurs even if no reinforcement is offered. Latent learning is not necessarily apparent at the time, but that appears later in situations where it is needed. Tolman's concepts of latent learning and cognitive maps helped pave the way of the rise of cognitive psychology. According to Edward Chase Tolman, a psychologist, latent learning is a learning that occurs, that does not become apparent until there is an incentive to demonstrate that learning. In other words, latent learning is a kind of learning that remains or stays with the individual until needed. Here are some examples. What is cognitive map? A cognitive map is a mental picture or image of the layout of one's physical environment. The term was first coined by a psychologist named Edward Tolman in the 1940s. Cognitive maps can help us navigate unfamiliar territory, give directions, and learn or recall information. When we create cognitive maps, we often omit information that is irrelevant to the task at hand. This means that they can differ from the actual environment we are mapping. How does a cognitive map work? A cognitive map is often created and used without conscious thought. This is a form of latent learning. When a human or animal is exposed to the same environment multiple times, they begin to create a mental picture based on cues from the environment. Cognitive maps are crucial for navigation and becoming familiar with places. These are the examples. What does a cognitive map represent? A cognitive map represents stimuli from the physical environment, including features such as landmarks, street names, and left or right directions. A person memorizes these stimuli often unconsciously so that areas or routes become familiar and known. Who was Albert Bandura? Albert Bandura was born on December 4, 1925 in a small Canadian town located approximately 50 miles from Edmonton. Albert Bandura is an influential social cognitive psychologist who is perhaps best known for his social learning theory, the concept of self-efficacy, and his famous Bobo doll experiments. He is a professor emeritus at Stanford University and is widely regarded as one of the greatest living psychologists. What was his experiment? In 1961, Bandura carried out his famous Bobo doll experiment, a study in which researchers physically and verbally abused a clown-faced inflatable toy in front of preschool-age children, which led the children to later mimic the behavior of the adults by attacking the doll in the same fashion. A Bobo doll is an inflatable toy that is approximately the same size as a prepubescent child. The aim of Bandura's experiment was to demonstrate that if children were witnesses to an aggressive display by an adult, they would imitate the aggressive behavior when given the opportunity. What did you derive out of the experiments? The Bobo doll experiment involved exposing children to two different adult models, an aggressive model and a non-aggressive one. After witnessing the adult's behavior, the children would then be placed in a room without a model and were observed to see if they would imitate the behaviors they had witnessed earlier.